Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Insta Live. I'm Reva Judas, the director of Nechama Comfort, and I'm really excited tonight to invite you to listen to a wonderful, wonderful psychologist, therapist, somebody in the field of grief trauma, specifically for pregnancy and infant loss. Gabrielle Moskovitz is, I actually know her for a very long time, know her family. She is a wonderful person, and I'm going to invite her to come on. And you are in for a very informational. Okay, let's see. Gabrielle. Oh, there she is. Perfect, perfect.
Hi.
Okay, I just gave you an formal introduction. So this is Gabrielle Moskowitz. If I go back and call her Gabi sometimes or Lasha, that's because I know her probably since she was born. And that even gives me, I love when I see students that I know, families that I know that have become amazing professional human beings, women, and extra special when I meet somebody who is helping the community of couples, families going through pregnancy and infant loss. So thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to introduce you a little bit. Um, Gabrielle is a therapist at Collaborative Minds, a psychotherapy place specializing in maternal mental health. It's located in Teaneck, but I think we can also connect with you, right, on Zoom and phone
Yeah.
and other ways. She is passionate, and I mean that with an exclamation mark, about advocating for women's health access with issues such as infertility, pregnancy loss, postpartum anxiety, depression, and struggles with motherhood. And you see how excited I was to meet you. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. So let's just jump into it. Um, if anybody has questions, you could text me. I don't know how you're going to be so able technologically to answer them, but I will give you, our information, and I will give you Gabrielle's information at the end of the evening as well. So tell us a little bit about your journey. What
Sure.
how did you end up going into this profession? Um, what is your life like?
I went into this profession pretty coincidentally, I would say through my own experiences, navigating like my own reproductive journey. So I'll be very honest and candid in this conversation. And so when my husband and I decided to start trying for a child, I went to my OB just to check in, and she told me that I have PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so she said, like, instead of waiting 6 months, all that kind of stuff. We're just going to put you on oral Clomid. It's a pill that you take and it helps you ovulate and you should be good to go. So it's a very proactive way to get pregnant. I tried it for the first month, it didn't work. She upped my dose. I tried it for the second month and I got pregnant with our son, Noah. So I would say while it wasn't conventional way to get pregnant, it was pretty seamless and easy. I didn't have to like go through all those hoops. And so when Noah was about 1 years old, we decided we were ready for number two. I went back to that same OB, did the same exact thing with the Clomid, but this time it wasn't working. And it was very, I would say, disheartening because just like a year and a half, 2 years ago, I did the exact same thing. So we tried letrozole, which is another oral medication, and it was about 4 to 6 months of that kind of stuff. And she recommended we see an infertility specialist. I remember that conversation, and it was very, very daunting for me to hear those words. My husband's in the medical field, so he was pretty like freaked out in terms of the medical aspect and how, invasive it could be. And so we kept on pushing off the appointment, but eventually we went. And we had a consultation and we decided we would start after Passover because we were going away. Um, I ended up getting pregnant took a pregnancy test on Passover, and we were so excited. Our families knew we were, about to start a medicated cycle with injections, and so like this was like amazing. Um, and that unfortunately ended in a miscarriage at 9 weeks. I was discharged from the fertility doctor. They had seen me because I went for a consultation, and I got discharged to my regular OB. I went, and then I have a history of anxiety, so I asked if I could like come for weekly ultrasounds just to get some reassurance. So I just happened to go in at 9 weeks alone, and the doctor said, unfortunately, there's no heartbeat. I didn't have any like physical symptoms, nothing at all. So it was quite shocking and obviously devastating after like this at this point it was almost a year of trying to get pregnant. And so I had a DNC, which was not super fun, but it went well, thankfully. And
The procedure in the hospital, the doctor's
it
office.
was an outpatient surgery center, but it was during COVID, so nobody was allowed to come with me. So I was alone, like my husband couldn't come. So that was really, really tough, I would say. And the recovery physically was totally fine, but emotionally, I was not okay. And I had a 2-year-old at home, so I couldn't really be not okay, but I was not okay. And I kind of was just on this mindset of like, okay, let's just go back to the fertility doctor, let's get pregnant, that's the goal. And so we decided to not wait another month, go back to the fertility doctor. And then I got pregnant again before we did anything. So, as you can imagine, it was incredibly anxiety provoking that whole pregnancy. I don't think I slept for 9 months. I was constantly waiting for the bad news, the shoe to drop, what's going to happen.
Right.
And especially during the first trimester, it was very, very scary and anxiety provoking. But thank God it was a healthy pregnancy. I actually had a pretty traumatic birth with that one, which ended in like an emergency C-section, and it was not great. But I was very happy that my our second son Caleb was born. And after that, I said, looked at my husband and I said, we are never going on birth control again. And he was laughing. And we didn't. And actually, when Caleb, who's our second child, was about 4 months old, was feeling a little nauseous. And I said, I feel like I might be pregnant. And my husband said, no way. And we took a test and it was positive. And I remember like freaking out. I'm like, I have a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, a 4-month-old. Like, what's going on? And it was actually the morning of Thanksgiving, which we were spending with both of our families. And so we decided to tell them, and they thought we were joking because we had a little tiny baby at home. But we were so excited because, we'd been through so much to have Caleb that this felt sort of like redemption in a way.
Yep.
Um, and when I saw the doctor, everything was great. I heard the heartbeat about 3 or 4 times again for the weekly ultrasounds. And I was about 9 weeks, I started spotting and I called the doctor and he's like, you're fine, you were in yesterday, no big deal. And anyways, long story short, I ended up miscarrying naturally at home on Shabbat, which was very traumatic, I would say. And I ended up in the ER by myself because my husband had to stay with the kids. So
Mm.
that was like natural miscarriage, which I think is way worse than the DNC, at
Yeah.
least in my opinion.
Mhm.
And after that, I was not okay. So I did not know that after a miscarriage, you can experience postpartum depression. I'm in this field and I did not know of it because your body produces the hormones for pregnancy. And so I experienced postpartum depression, yet I didn't have a baby with me to show for that. So I think that's really important for people to know that that can occur. And I never heard of it, and I work in the mental health field. So
Right.
I think it's really, really important for our listeners just to hear that this is a possibility. And so I sought treatment for that. And that's sort of when I decided to go into this field because there was just not a lot of resources out there. I was seeing a therapist at the time, but he was a male, and I just felt I needed more. Like I needed somebody who understood and kind of had the resources to share with me in order to get through this horrible time. And so that's when I decided, like I was in school, I was graduating, and I said, this is what I'm doing. I used to want to actually work with adolescents. So this was a complete shift for me.
Right.
Um, But I think it's just shows that, us women, like we're warriors. We go through so much. Our bodies go through so many changes just to get pregnant and to stay pregnant and to deliver. And whether you have a vaginal birth or a C-section, like a lot of people experience birth trauma and and postpartum anxiety and postpartum depression. And I think there just needs to be more clinicians in this field because it's such a unfortunately common situation for women.
Well, I'm sorry for what you're going through, for what you went through, for your losses. Um, but people always say to me crazy things. They'll say like, do you understand now why your son passed away or why you went through this so you could help people? And no, that's not why it happened. But sometimes we meet people that leads us in this direction. So the community is grateful because when I had my loss 38 years ago, we were told by professionals, do not go for therapy. You don't have to go for therapy. And then people are going, and that's how it was. And we didn't at first. And it's important for people to understand that what they're going through is normal. Is normal. So thank you for sharing your journey with us. Just one question. Did you know about your medical condition before you started having children?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so it's important to really, before you're starting to have children, at whatever stage that is in your life, young, older, uh, to really make sure you go to a doctor to check.
Absolutely. And I would say it's important for us women to know like what sort of conditions you have. Even I would say even before you're trying to give birth. Like
Mhm.
somebody mentioned it in passing to me when I was 18, like, oh, you might have PCOS, but
Yeah,
if no one had said that, I would have never known. And then I might have had to go through a whole journey even before having kids. So I think, yeah, definitely advocate for yourself and kind of go to the gynecologist, get a full exam, ask for blood work, and sort of see like what's my baseline or are there things that I'm dealing with so I can know ahead of time.
exactly, exactly. I think that's so important. So when you and I have discussed a lot of things, when we when we when we're going through pregnancy and infant loss and the Chama Comfort, we really work with families that go through early miscarriage, stillbirths, SIDS through the age of 1. And there are differences. That's why we have professionals or case managers, therapists like you that work with the individual couple. But in our support group, we really deal with it. Common grief. What is a grief journey? We all hear trauma and grief. This is the buzzword since COVID. People that have experienced their all traumas and loss and PTSD and things know that it existed before there were names for it. But do you consider, should people understand, people, not necessarily the people going through it, and sometimes there are couples going through early miscarriages that don't understand why they're feeling like that, because sometimes the medical profession will treat it as a medical situation, as almost
Hmm.
say like a wart removal. Thank God doctors have gotten somewhat better, but there are still some. So, what would you say to couples feeling this? What would you say to their family, the friends, the community understanding this? Is pregnancy and infant loss a trauma?
Absolutely. I think it's a trauma. I think that people can react in many different ways. I had a client that told me she had a miscarriage and she was laughing when she told me. And I think there's no right way, but I do think it is a trauma. And sometimes it comes up years later for people. And sometimes it looks like the couple fighting. And sometimes it looks like the mom being unable to interact with her other kids at home, or and I would say for families of people going through this, I would say to check in, but also not to ask like how I can help, but say, I'm going to do X for you. I'm going to bring you dinner. I'm going to do carpool for the children. I'm going to send flowers. Instead of saying like, how can I help or what can I do? I found that really helpful. Like when we were going through losses, my friends just said, we're sending you dinner on Thursday. Not like, what can I do? Because the person going through the grief, they're not really thinking like, this is what I need, right? They're not necessarily in that mindset. So I think that people can show up in those ways. And I think people could have open conversations. And I also think people should look out for red flags. So if things are impacting your daily functioning, if the couple or the husband or wife are not sleeping, they're not eating, they're not able to go to work, they're sitting in bed all day, they're not functioning, they're not taking care of their other children, that's the point when like the trauma is so severe that they need to get help right away. But I do think that families can be open about this topic because it's not a fun topic. It's uncomfortable. A lot of people shy away from it, but the more that we talk about it, the more that we can help each other, and also the more real the experience feels for the couple going through it. So whereas some people might say you were only pregnant for 9 weeks, like what's the big deal?
Yeah.
It's a grief of, for at least for me, for personally, it was a grief of what I lost. Like every due date, every anniversary of that date, um, people can choose to commemorate it in any way they want. But personally, I light a candle every single due date for both of mine, and that's just something that works for me. But I think it's people can choose how they want to commemorate it. But I do think that going through any loss is traumatic, whether it's an infant loss, pregnancy loss, losing a parent, anything like that. And I think it's important for us to all be there for each other and to really ask those questions, not how I can help you, but this is what I'm going to do for you. This is how I'm going to ease your dinner time routine. I'm going to send the food. I'm going to pick up your kid. I'm going to do all these things. So that's what I would recommend.
Beautiful, beautiful. When I tell people, I say it's a unique loss. There are similarities to other grief and losses, a parent, a sibling, a spouse. What makes it unique is we don't have the memories. We go to Shiva houses now, and there's PowerPoints, montages out, uh, memory books, things. We could Zoom everything. But when we have a baby that only lives in our hopes and dreams, we don't have that necessarily. And I think that's what makes it unique. What else? And I'm going to ask. I know that you just work with women, right? That's your.
I work with couples a bit, but I primarily work with women. But I do think that men absolutely need support going through this. I think it's a very different experience than the woman, but it's absolutely just as hard and there's just as much grief. And I do think that men should seek out therapy as well to process it.
Right, right. Yeah. We have case managers like you work with the couples and have individual support groups as well. And what about other children? Your children were young when you had your loss, as you said.
Yeah, so my children were young. My oldest was 2 when we had our first loss, and I remember I remember this exact moment of me like sitting on the couch, hysterical crying, and my son was like, "Why is mommy sad?" And I think my husband might have said like something really sad happened to mommy. I don't think we necessarily told him that like there was a baby in my belly because he was just 2, maybe not even. Um, but I do think that when he's older, he's like 5 now. I will tell him that, you know, there were 2 losses in this family. And I think it's important to know that, there's Noah, then there is a child that we lost, and there's Caleb, then there was a child that we lost, and then there's Avery. So we did have 5 pregnancies, even though we have 3 living kids. And, it's something I'm super grateful for, but I do think it's part of our story and part of our family.
Yeah, I agree. I know professionally we all know that secrets, family secrets for anything is not the way we should handle things. And, I was a kindergarten teacher, as you know, in Mariah for many years. And, we would always tell the parents, share with us anything that's going on. And, in our family story, our son was our oldest. And I have 4 living children and grandchildren, and they all always knew about their older brother, and it was definitely healthier, and they were able to grow up and be healthy in terms of wanting to build families because we were honest with them, and I think that's so important as well. when somebody comes to you and says, and we get that a lot, okay, this is what happened to me. I had a loss at 16 weeks, let's say, and I'm depressed. Okay, but help me, you know, and it can't be instant. I always say, I wish I invented that
Hmm.
magic pills, but we don't use those in our practices. It's going to take time. How do you tell somebody when they come in and they're like, and I'm sure they do, like, help me.
Yeah. So it's very tragic. Like it's not a fun conversation, but I think it's really important to be realistic with people and to kind of set the expectations that grief is like compared to waves, right? Like it comes in waves, and sometimes it feels like there's this huge wave over you and you can't breathe. And other times it's sort of calm, the ocean, right? And it hits you out of nowhere sometimes. So what I tell people is like this is a process. It's not, again, if I say something like if I had a magic wand and could fix everything,
Right.
I would love to, but that's not life. The person has to be willing to do the work. So I would say coming to therapy every single week. Another tool that I always recommend to my clients is support groups. I think they're so, so impactful just to be with other people that have gone through similar experiences. It makes it validating and just knowing that there's other people out there like you. So I would say that a lot of times, again, if it's impacting the daily functioning, to a point of like more than, a month or two, I definitely recommend using medication as well. Sometimes medication in conjunction with therapy is the best way to go. Obviously, it's not the first thing I would say, but if it's really impacting the person, and a strong support system is really key. So sometimes I'll recommend couples therapy for the husband and wife because I think men and women process things differently. So, and it is the woman's body, right? So, in the case of a 16-week miscarriage, at sometimes the woman might have had to deliver the baby, and I think that's an very you can't really explain that if you're not a woman, right? Delivering a child that's not live. So I think that sometimes that causes a little bit of tension in the marriage where, the husband is not processing in the same way or they don't know how to be there for their wife. And so I would say like individual therapy, couples therapy, support groups, reaching out to family and friends and finding other people that have gone through similar things are like the first things that we would work on.
Wow. Whenever I hear a conversation like this or person, I'm like, wow, amazing, because this is how we need to help. We need to work together to get people healthy. And that's
Yeah.
why we say it's how to put their child into their lives and to move through it,
Right.
because you're going to be able to get past it.
Exactly.
Mentions one other thing. Um, as we know, the world, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. And people say, is it different from when I grew up? Whether things was it this bad or not? I think that, as we all know, social media has increased the information that we find out instantly about what is going on. And especially most of our families that join, you know, our hearts and our news is with Israel, as well as other things going on locally. Trauma, trauma, trauma. That's all we can see. At 11 o'clock now, I really try not to put on the news because that's all it is. But we can't erase it, and especially um, what's going on in Israel and feeling this in our community. What advice do you give to people? Not only advice how to get through this, because you just said it's the same thing, community, therapy, help. But what advice do you give to the couple to sort of validate that their trauma and loss is is equally important as a national trauma? And I get that a lot. We
Yeah.
see that a lot. And that's one of the reasons I started Nechama Comfort, was that we would have a time for us. That's why October 1988, people don't even realize that's when President Ronald Reagan signed the bill for Pregnancy Infant Loss Awareness Month. But besides that, what advice can you give to people to help them say, you matter, you count?
So Great question. So I think a lot of us grew up in this like there are starving kids in Africa mentality. At least I
Mhm.
did. And I think that's such an unhealthy mentality because it's exactly what you're saying. There's no comparison of pain, right? One person's pain can be this and another person's can be up here, and we can't compare our pain. And so I think the trauma that you're going through is your trauma and it's your pain to carry. And so we can always say there are worse things in the world. There are starving kids, there's an awful situation in Israel, there's poverty, there's COVID, there's all these horrible things. But when you're the one going through it, your pain sometimes feels as big as that, and it should and it can. And I think you need to, I would say, to give yourself permission to feel the way you feel, regardless of the outside circumstances, because there'll always be someone that has it worse than you. And I don't think it should be this like pain comparison game. And I think it's very important to note that within the infant loss community, because I do find that sometimes people will say, what week was your loss? And I'll say, let's say 9. And they'll be like, oh, but my friend lost one at 38 weeks, or my friend. And it's like becoming this sort of like competition, which should not be. So I think it's just important to mention that, a 9-week loss to someone can be tragedy, and a 30, they're all tragedies. They're never, and so just to be able to kind of vocalize that, this is something that I'm going through, this is my trauma, and somebody, of course, will have it worse and someone will have it easier. And that's sort of how life is, right?
Wow. Wow. And one other question, just professional to professional, because I get that asked all the time. Um, does it affect us? Does it affect you? Do you do self-care? Do you take care of yourself too?
So yes, I am a huge proponent of self-care, and I would say that's something that started within the last like a year to year and a half. Once I started doing this professionally more, as like a full-time job, I knew that I had to take care of myself because I couldn't show up for my clients, I couldn't show up for my 3 little kids, for my husband, for my family if I wasn't taking care of me. And something that an old therapist of mine said that stuck with me forever was, on the airplane, they say, like, put your own oxygen mask on before you put your kids or other people. And I always was like, why? Of course I would put my kids. But now it makes sense, right? We can't show up as professionals, especially when we deal with so much trauma and tragedy on a like daily basis. We need to prioritize doing things for self-care. So obviously for everyone it's different. For me it's like pilates and yoga and making coffee dates with friends and going on walks, being active, and reading as well, and baking. So I think everyone needs to find their own thing, but prioritizing yourself is key, especially when you're going through trauma. You have to create that space for yourself,
For everybody.
for
Excellent.
everybody.
And that's a good segue into thanking you and your Instagram post. I love what your Instagram title is, whatever we call it. What is shared with everybody?
It's at the chef therapist. I like to cook, I like to bake, so sometimes I'll share like recipes or things that I'm cooking or baking, and I also share like resources and tips and personal stories and articles and things like that. So you can find me at the chef therapist.
Love that. And we'll when we post the video, will be on YouTube. We'll send the information. You can reach out to me, um, and I'm excited to share with everybody that Gabrielle and I will continue to work together, um, helping this community. Stay tuned for some more details. But thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you
you, Reva.
for helping our families and for being such a sweet person
Thank you.
that we at all times. All right. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.